And off we go.
All right.
And off we go.
Here we are.
How are you doing today, sir?
I'm pretty well.
Pretty well.
I guess I'm dressed.
You got a nice shirt on.
Yeah.
Dress shirt on. You got
How
a
about
couple
you?
of wool hats going.
Yeah. You
Didn't
got
plan
your
that.
you mean business.
This is my songwriting. This is my hit making jacket, which obviously is not working so well thus far. Still waiting for those hits to come into fruition, but I'm not giving up.
They're percolating.
I'm not gonna give up. Let's see here. You've been writing songs at least a few days now.
A little while.
And I just got into it a couple hours ago. I'm feeling pretty confident.
Well, only way to go is up from here.
Yeah, I've learned so much just in a few short hours. And
It's amazing.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk about songwriting, talk about songs, talk about our history of writing songs, and philosophy of writing songs, what we love about songs. So much
Just
to discuss.
Yeah, where to begin?
Oh, how about at the beginning? When did you first write your first song?
What a great question.
Thank you.
I remember working on something of a bluesy nature because really my musical history stems from my dad passing away and me inheriting all his harmonicas. So I remember sitting in front of my Fostex. You remember the Fostex?
You had a digital Fostex?
No, it was a 4-track tape.
Cassette.
Yeah. And then if you reverse the tape, you'd hear it backwards.
Evil stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Trying to decode yourself.
Yeah.
What am I trying to tell myself?
Subliminally, yeah.
And it was very bluesy. And I remember peeking the mic a bunch. And I remember thinking, wow, that sounds pretty cool. And nowadays, when I that's kind of the sound I prefer on a vocal. You know, I love that old '60s sound. And,
Yeah,
that's I don't remember what the song was about or anything. I remember it was bluesy. It had harmonica on it.
Okay, so you inherited the harmonicas and the tape recorder from your dad?
My mom bought that for
Okay.
me because she sort of recognized that I
Okay.
was into music.
Yep. Okay, so you inherited your harmonicas from your dad. Didn't you also say you inherited his record collection as well?
Yeah, he was an avid blues fan, much to the chagrin of my mom. And you know, when they went to parties and he'd put it on.
She wasn't a blues
Blues isn't necessarily the best thing to put on at a party. It's a bit of a downer, as they say.
I see that. Okay.
But anyway, he pretty much exclusively bought blues records.
Okay.
And I remember the very first album that I learned music to was I played all the harmonica parts to a song called 40 Days and 40 Nights, which was on a Muddy Waters album called Fathers and Sons, which I now understand is quite symbolic.
I was going to say, wow.
I didn't realize it at the time.
That's crazy.
But I remember that kind of light bulb going off in that moment and me thinking, well, this is incredible. I have an innate love for this, and I'm sure I'm going to be continuing.
All right, so you were learning how to play that song, and you had you're ripping harmonica solos off of it. Yeah. What did you think? What did you notice about that song structure? Because it's a kind of particular style.
Yeah,
blues to 12-bar blues.
Yeah,
you kind of have this 1, 4, 5 progression. Yeah, 12-bar format. Mm-hmm. So would you pick that up? Were you playing guitar or?
No, I just remember thinking that I think to this day I feel the same way that the harmonica is more closely linked to one's soul than maybe any other instrument. I'd say vocals maybe would compare to that, but I remember thinking, wow, the soul and the sound of this is incredible. I want to be able to emulate it, and I had a theory book about harmonica. Hal Leonard, you know the Hal Leonard books?
Totally.
I think it was a Hal Leonard book.
I'm pretty sure my first guitar chord book was a Hal Leonard book.
Right, and I remember learning about how to bend a reed, and once I learned how to bend a reed, I realized that the harmonica has far more potential than I had originally thought, because you can get so much out of one hole. You can exhale, inhale, then you can bend the notes. There's all these things, and there's so much nuance. And so that opened the door to everything else, singing and playing guitar and everything I did after that. It all started with a harmonica.
Do you know, so what was that first song about? You remember? What was your
40 Days and 40 Nights? Or the first song I wrote?
The first song you wrote.
Well, it was that Fostex song. I don't remember if there even were lyrics. I remember making sounds. I remember using the harmonica. And loving that sound of the mic peaking, which is when it kind of gets gritty if the signal's too loud.
Yeah.
For those laymen out there.
Wait, so just to be clear, the song "The Fathers and Sons" was your song, or was the Muddy Waters song?
That was the Muddy Waters song, and as far as songs goes, it was fairly generic. It had the typical blues themes.
Yeah.
My woman left me. I feel bad
about
it. Right. So I think the theme is 40 days and 40 nights since I saw my woman.
Yeah.
Kind of idea.
Yeah.
But the licks were awesome. I loved the way it sounded, and so that set me off on a musical path that continues to this day.
That's a pretty good example of like using what would you call the usage of 40 days and 40 nights? That's like a biblical theme. That's a like
floods.
Thematic. That's pulling from something.
Yeah.
That's a song. Approach or of pulling from some sort of
themes,
deep well,
universal themes too, right?
Of poetic metaphor.
Yeah.
The idea of 40 days and 40 nights is going to pull on a range of
and it's kind of I
feelings.
think of it almost as a trial period. You go through this darkness and you come out the other side, and I guess that was in line with what myself and my family had experienced with my dad passing away fairly recently, and so there's all that. Looking back now, I realize it was more symbolic than I originally had thought, and so that's very interesting.
Nice. My first song, I had some kind of Casio keyboard that would make beats. It was like it has the kind of rhythm section or whatever. You push start, and then it's like or whatever. I don't know what the beat was, but I had a beat going, and I'd written a song about, it's more of a rap about a caveman. Okay. So like I wake up in the middle of the night and I go downstairs and I open the fridge and there's a caveman in the fridge. Oh. He comes out, we have this whole conversation. I don't really remember what the conversation was about, but I remember this whole scenario around this first song.
Wait, was this a dream?
This is real life.
Oh.
My
you
song.
Literally saw a caveman in the fridge?
The song was metaphorical. It was fantasy, not literal. It was, just the wild imagination of a
I'd like to hear that.
6-year-old.
You still have it?
I have no idea, and in fact,
I'd love to hear it.
You're about to find out how it just got lost in the abyss. So, I wrote this rap, and then there was this radio station I used to listen to. It's still around. It's called Way FM 88.7. It's a Christian radio station. Okay. And there was a group called DC Talk.
Yeah.
Familiar?
Yep. Absolutely.
Famous for such songs as Jesus Freak and others. Anyways, they were giving away tickets on this radio station. And I thought, well, I'll just kind of like trick my dad into calling and maybe he'll win the tickets. But you had to call in and do a rap.
Okay.
So I figured he wouldn't get through. My dad calls, and I hear on the radio, Way FM 88.7, you're on the air.
First try.
And my dad, they're like, do you have a rap? And my dad goes, well, no, but my son does. And I was like, oh, snap.
Uh-oh.
So I ran upstairs to find my lyrics. I'm looking everywhere frantically. Can't find my lyrics anywhere.
Oh, no.
So I was like, oh, no. And this probably explains like a whole slew of nightmares that I still have where I like show up to a gig and can't remember the lyrics.
Yeah.
I go downstairs. He's on the air, so I'm like, it's like gotta make it. So run downstairs, can't find my lyrics. Okay. What were you gonna say?
Oh, I was gonna ask if you'd found them yet. Yeah.
No, they just disappeared into nowhere, just gone. So I go downstairs. I was like, well, maybe I can remember it. So I'm on the call with the radio station. He's like, what's your name? I said, Jeffrey, you got a rap? I was like, yeah. So I start into it, and I forget my lyrics.
Oh, no.
Like, let me start again. Start again, forget my lyrics. I make it as far as I can, and then it's like I wait, and no lie, I think the dude probably knew I was a little kid. The guy on the radio station says, that was the worst rap I've ever heard in my life.
No.
Dude.
You'll never forget that moment.
Crushed. And so I hung up the phone and went upstairs in my room and just cried. It was just awful. But the contest was still running, and so I was like, I'm going to show that dude. So that night I wrote a whole different song. It was definitely like a Christian gospel kind of song, all about. Are you familiar with the Romans Road? So there's like a particular set of scriptures that they say, like, you lead someone to Christ or you share the gospel, you take them to the Romans Road. It basically gives like the framework of the gospel. Everybody's a sinner. Jesus did this. Here's what you can receive if you receive Jesus.
Okay.
So I wrote, there was lines around this, something like, pull out my Bible and share the Romans Road. It's something, But all the while in my mind, I'm like, I'm about to show this guy, like he's gonna regret, what he said to me. Okay. Never got through again.
No.
But that was my first song and second song on one experience.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Wow.
Especially considering, like, this is what I do with my life. Like, talk about a potential moment that could have derailed the rest of my life, like my purpose and my soul.
Yeah.
All because some rando dude on a Christian radio station was like, "You suck, kid."
Yeah. Well, I don't think that qualifies as bullying, but I do think to a certain extent bullying helps in that way, where you get that crash course on reality, and you're no longer, maybe with your parents, they might have been more effusive about what you were doing than the general public, but you got a glimpse into how thick-skinned you need to be as an entertainer to deal with public opinion, because when people don't have a personal relationship with you, they don't have a vested interest in being nice.
Yeah, they just stone cold.
Yeah, and I think we need to hear that as people who want to be, at least in some capacity, in the public eye.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty brutal industry.
Yeah, I learned that on Canadian Idol and in other ways too, but that was definitely a crash course.
On Canadian Idol, were you allowed to do your own songs? Did they encourage that?
No, it's a cover show, but it reminds me of that moment that you had where he said, well, that was the worst, because I had one of those performances and I got sort of universally panned.
Oh, wow.
That was the first live week, and that was brutal.
Yeah, I bet.
Because you're dealing with millions of people and you're like, wow.
Yeah, mine was not quite.
I just got egg on my face in a very public forum.
Yeah, big time.
It's just so embarrassing.
Yeah. And then it's just like, you get to see what you're made of.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Are you going to go cry, or are you going to keep moving?
And then you ask yourself, well, what is my reason for doing this? And if the love of creating the music is your foundation, then that ultimately doesn't matter. You just move through it and you're stronger for it, and you apply those things that you learned. Maybe when you get panned, there's a certain amount of validity to what the public is sensing. And maybe it's important to take that to heart and apply it to your work. And go, well, why didn't that work? I see. I've maybe dialed it up too much there.
Who knows? Any number of things. So, all right. So, what would you say? What would be your definition of a song? You can go as literal as you want, and go as potentially.
Well, a song to me is a musical piece with a definite structure, a discernible structure.
Okay. Discernible structure.
Yeah.
Like, aside from like a poem or something, which could be as much as like potentially stream of consciousness.
Yeah, I suppose.
This is more organized thought. I guess identifiable structure.
The term poem allows for infinite possibilities with the use of language, the playing with language. Although I prefer poems that adhere to a rigid structure, like a sonnet. Because within that structure you have infinite possibility, but the structure of it is what defines the art.
Yeah.
So I think where songs are concerned, you can take that traditional verse, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge as an example. That's obviously something that maybe we use too much as a device now, but it's a very regimented, structured thing.
Yeah.
Within which you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. What would you say, looking back at your earlier songs, how many songs would you say you might have written up to this point?
Maybe 200.
Really?
Yeah. Something like that.
It seemed like I would have thought a much higher number.
Maybe much higher, but there are those songs that maybe never get put out.
When did you start writing? How old were you?
16.
Okay.
Yeah, I really started because I had a band we moved back to Canada, and I started playing all ages shows in town. And I had a band. It was called Laughing Sam's Dice, which is from a Jimi Hendrix song.
It's a cool name.
And then I really started in earnest writing music and,
nice,
plying my wares.
Yeah. So what would you say would you have a discernible difference between songs in your early stage and now? Like, how would you say your development of learning how to craft what you consider as a great song or well-written song?
Well, I started when I was a teenager, just sort of emulating what I was hearing on the radio and in pop culture. And then when I was 20, I signed a deal with BMG Music Publishing in Canada. And the first thing they did, it was a development deal with the idea that I would be launched ultimately as an artist in my own right. So they wanted to build up my catalog, and they teamed me up with all these top 40 writers on the roster.
Yeah.
And so I learned from the experts how to craft a commercially viable song that would be suitable for the radio, that 3.5 minute, stereotypical song. And I ultimately left that deal, but I brought that with me, that sensibility. And then I became very interested in abstract lyrical devices. I listened to a lot of Dylan and artists of that ilk, where the references and the way the lyrics would play out would be far more ethereal and open to interpretation than your traditional radio song. So I started bringing that into my writing a little later on.
Yep. What would you say if you were to define identifiable formulaic things that they tried to tell you or you learned that were happening in commercial pop music among these guys you were learning from? Mm-hmm. What were some of those identifiable, you always got to do this, this is important to do this, these types of things? You have any of those?
I do. One piece of advice I got that I'll apply it where it makes sense is that your verse typically melodically would fall under where your chorus is.
Right. There's a lift.
Yes. There's a melodic lift, and you're hitting notes higher in the scale than you would in the verses. Yep. And there's also that trick where you introduce the hook line at the beginning of the chorus, and then you wrap it up at the end. Yep. And they're kind of bookending the chorus.
But always the kind of landing, whether it's at the beginning, always the landing place, hook thing. Mm-hmm. Go on.
Yes, absolutely. And then you would often shorten your second verse. Perhaps you would do half the amount of bars that your first verse would have. So you're alluding to the chorus in the first verse, in the first half and the second half. More in the second half, obviously, than the first. And then the second verse is half as long, and you're sort of further encapsulating what you were earlier saying, and then you go straight into that pre-chorus, then the chorus, and then, of course, you've got that bridge. Yep.
Have you ever heard anybody refer to it as the middle eight?
Yes, we used that in England when I lived over there, and the producer would always say that, and I had to look it up.
Yeah, I learned that later on. Yeah. I was like, what the heck is the middle eight?
Yeah.
You ever hear the phrase, don't bore us, get to the chorus?
Yes. The typical rule of thumb, this was the mid-2000s, things have changed a little bit now, but the typical rule of thumb was that you want to hit the chorus in the first minute.
Yeah.
Ideally around 50 seconds.
That's the marker.
Hey, right. Yep. So all these things were things that I was inculcated about.
The box. You're given the framework. Here's the box.
And I think that was good for me.
Sure.
I like structure.
You kind of got to learn the rules before you break them.
Yeah, and I became more sophisticated later, where I started listening to more esoteric bands and more indie stuff, and I started learning about sounds and how things didn't always need to be that way.
Right. Yeah. What about kind of like musical sensibilities within song, harmony, chord progression? What did you learn? Did you notice? I guess one thing I noticed, like when I kind of had the same trajectory. It's like commercial music, learning how to create like a super catchy song, how to write a hit, these types of approaches. Like if I want to write something commercial pop music that everybody in the world will love, you kind of have to adhere to some things, or at least study the great songs and figure out, well, what are they doing?
Yeah.
What makes this song great?
Yeah.
And one thing that I noticed in my trajectory was kind of like, I was a big fan of Motown. I was a big fan of like soul music. So I was a big fan of jazz. I loved pop music, but I tended towards things that are a little more harmonically interesting. Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, later on in life, John Mayer, Jason Mraz, because they were pop, but they had jazzy things.
Well, you always want to have something that's flipped on its head.
That's nice. I agree. I personally like that. But one thing I noticed in my trajectory was like, early on, I'm learning crazy chord progressions and mostly writing about love, some about life, but mostly in pop music, it's kind of about relationship, I'd say, for the most part.
Yeah.
And then when I started listening to Dylan, or, it's kind of like once you have more to say, you play less. It's almost like if you have less to say, like, oh, baby, baby, I love you, you can play all over the place, maybe crazy chords or movement. But it's like once you have more lyrics to say, or more deeper things to say, the chords get less. Like for a Dylan song or whatever, or a country song, or a folk song, you kind of have these very simple folky chords, and the poetic nature of the lyrics are like super dense, super rich, super deep. I don't know if that's always the case, but it seemed like that kind of, that's at least the way that I went. It's like once I had something a little more life pondering to say, the music I put underneath it had to change because it didn't work with the oh baby baby stuff.
Yeah. Well, I started learning as far as I'm concerned, I started learning about context and how when you think of an icon or a rock star, people think that the people they see, Steven Tyler, maybe it would be an example.
I'm just going to make sure this is still recording. We're still recording.
Okay.
Also, I'm going to make sure this is still recording. I'm going to flip it over just so I know. Go on.
So they see Steven Tyler and they think of all the things that are related to his name. But that's a brand. Steven Tyler's a brand. Steven Tyler is a theatrical character. He's created something that's consummate with the band he's in. It makes sense. Everything, it all works together. But ultimately, it's a character. And I guess to illustrate my point, I'll just talk about my perspective on a Kid Rock song. I think it was that "Sweet Home Alabama" song that he has.
Yeah. Singing Sweet Home Alabama all summer long.
What was the line? There's a particular line in the song where he's grammatically incorrect.
Okay.
And I always used to think, as a songwriter, I thought I knew everything.
Okay.
And
that was something you shouldn't do. Like, it should be grammatically correct.
Well, you've done this wrong. This is how it should be written. Yeah. And then I realized that the character that Kid Rock was creating, this kind of redneck, rough and tumble drinking guy who likes to party,
rock and roller,
wouldn't speak grammatically correctly. So I wasn't thinking about it holistically enough. I wasn't realizing that this is a character, and that's part and parcel of the character. Yeah. That his syntax wouldn't be right. He's a redneck. And I started to realize that things are far more sophisticated than I had thought before. Bob Dylan being another great example. You're talking about how the chords are so simple. That's part of who he is as a brand. And there's a song that I've mentioned to you before called Queen Jane Approximately, where he's completely out of tune. And, it's so grating, but it's also artistically very, it's a sophisticated choice that has to do with the punk rock nature of Bob Dylan and how he was kind of bucking the trends and doing his own thing. He didn't care. Or maybe they even went out to be out of tune. They went out of their way to be that way, because they were making an artistic statement.
Could be.
And now later in my career, having been educated on music, I understand that things are multidimensional in that way. You can't say, that's not how you're supposed to do it.
Right. It's like at the same time as there are rules, there are no rules.
Yes.
Which that's kind of the catch-22 of art, is kind of like, especially if you go to school for it, or you go to, seminars or whatever, they're going to teach you rules, and then it's your job to then take those rules and shatter them 1,000 different ways.
Yeah.
Depending on what you're doing, I guess. But what would be some of your favorite songs of all time?
The Gambler.
It's a great one. What do you like about that song?
Well,
that would be what we call like a story song.
Yeah, it's a perfect song. It's often I don't love when choruses are repeated, unless there's some sort of change in some way, small lyrical
you've made
change.
the case before that there's no real reason to have
that's an example of a song. Drift Away is another one. I think also probably the greatest chorus ever written, where it's completely appropriate to repeat that chorus many times, and it never gets old. So those, I think, those buck the trend of choruses. Me thinking that choruses are too repetitious. I think that's a perfect application of a repeating chorus.
Yeah.
So those two. How many do you want me to list?
As many as you can think of.
Yeah. Wow.
I'll give you one of mine while you're thinking of some others.
Okay.
What a Fool Believes.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, just the fantastic. That hits.
Was that when he was in the Doobie Brothers?
Absolutely, yeah. There's just something harmonically going on there, groove wise, and that's a pretty good example of like what kind of bucks the trend of what I talked about earlier, of like a really complicated chord progression,
right?
Interesting jazzy thing with like pretty dense lyrics. I mean, like I think he's using like. I think it might even be inspired by a Bible verse. Those lyrics.
Which lyrics specifically would cause you to say that?
Man, I'd have to look at the lyrics. I have my phone. I could pull it up.
Ah, that's okay. Cool.
Something about being wise in your own eyes. Something like I know that there's some sort of. I've heard that he pulled something from. I guess what I'm just saying is there's a poetic richness there to those lyrics, whereas a lot of songs in that space would just be kind of pretty simple or literal. Or
well, it's always a challenge to write a banger of a song like that with unorthodox chord progressions,
totally,
and make it groove in a way that the general public could appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think, especially if you're into jazz or certain more sophisticated styles of music, chordally, you want to be able to do that as a musician. I think that's the holy grail, achieving a song that's both sophisticated and palatable for the general public.
Yeah. Should I think of any others?
In that vein?
Oh, just in general.
Oh, wow.
God Only Knows. Beach Boys, God Only Knows, to me
absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great Jailbreak, AC/DC.
Yeah, you played that one. That was great.
Well, it applies to my life and our journey in America coming here. And so
nice.
It's an exciting song for me in that way. I guess there's songs that you would call your favorite at different points in your life because they're applicable to
that's pretty good.
Your
That's
life.
A pretty good point. That could make a good segue. Like what makes a hit song, do you think? Not necessarily what makes a hit song, but what do you think a song that becomes a hit or a mega song is doing to the listener that makes everyone, like what are they successful at that a ton of other songs, because there's thousands of songs written every day, especially in Nashville. What are they accomplishing with their song that they're hitting that people are latching onto?
Well, there's some degree of simplicity in what they're saying in the song that has a universal appeal.
You mean content-wise, lyrically?
Yeah.
What about?
I guess Drift Away would be a great example of that. It's just something that resonates with everybody because it's something people aspire to. They want to drift away in the rhythm of the music, and you can just apply it in so many ways to your life, and it's universal.
Yeah, singability.
Yeah, Stand By Me. That's just a universal theme. That everybody can relate to. Yeah,
I heard somebody. I was with a company one time who used to give me all these reasons why whatever I created wasn't going to work or whatever. It was just a little bit just disheartening. But all these hard and fast rules. Some he said he learned from Barry Gordy. I don't know if that's true or not. But one thing he used to say all the time is like people. It's like in general are like sad and like having a rough time, and they want to hear songs that help them not feel so bad about their sad and rough time, or like rather than they want to like hear some sort of positive pep talk, they want to hear songs that let them know that they're not alone. Which again, I don't know about that as a hard and fast rule, but it was an interesting thing. It's like it's an interesting thing to think about. It's like people are in a rough spot. They want to hear music about somebody else who's in a rough spot so they don't feel so alone.
Yeah. Yeah, or they want to be reminded that we all share these things in common and go through things. People think when they're going through rough times that there's some kind of outlier and nobody else has to deal with that. And it is easy to forget. So when there's a song that speaks to that universal theme, they're reminded that they're not alone. They're part of this community of people.
I was reminded of something the other day when I was working on a song with a buddy. Something that has kind of come along over the years is like a lot of times as songwriters we want to like teach something or share an insight or change the world kind of idea, and sometimes you can write a song kind of like with the finger point kind of you thing, or like get up or whatever, and I like this idea of like rather than saying you in a song, saying I'm gonna get up and go. Because then when somebody sings along, they're saying as opposed to they're saying you.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight.
Yeah, it's pretty. I feel like it's a good kind of rule.
I suppose there would be certain exceptions where maybe you're talking to somebody. They're the subject of your. Whatever the song might be about. Yeah. Thunder only happens when it's raining. Dreams. That's the name of it.
Yeah. No, there you go again.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, I think, of that, where you would use you, and I think...
I mean, that's a pretty good example of a crazy setting for some crazy songwriting that was happening there with that album. They're all like going through divorces with each other while making music at the same time, writing songs about each other and their experiences, and then ends up being one of the greatest albums of all time.
Yeah.
Talking, of course, about Rumors.
All true.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite albums.
I like to sing gibberish when I'm working on a melody, because I have.
Oh, there you go. That's a good segue.
I have a philosophy about.
Yeah, talk about that. What is that?
I have a philosophy about lyricism that when the song comes out of me, it's always existed. It's always been there, and my job is to get out of the way. Yeah. But we all have this certain level of intellect that wants to interject itself into the process and ruin everything. Really, it's
like overthink
that false sense of self, or whatever it might be. Yeah. So when I sing gibberish, I'm speaking in tongues, and the idea there is that it's sort of like Michelangelo talking about Statue of David, where they asked him about how he made it, and he said he just chipped away the parts that weren't David. And so the idea there is that I'm singing the lyrics that were always there in spite of myself, and outsmarting my own intellect by not thinking about it, thereby allowing it to come out. And so then I can sit down later and I can hear these consonants landing in certain places,
and maybe not judging it as it's coming.
And then after the fact, going, oh, that wanted to be there. That's why it came out,
and can oftentimes steer or act as a guide for the whole song, because they are like these guideposts that are like, these are important words, move things around this.
Yes, yeah. That's there's your start. Now you have your starting point.
Right.
And so now you're working out from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can definitely say, some of my best songs, and I've heard plenty of other folks say some of the best songs come the fastest, and it just feels like it's just coming through.
Yeah.
They're just like, I don't know what this is or where it's coming from, but it just came. You just know exactly what it's supposed to be, and it just comes out, and it's done in 15 minutes.
And you know when it's not working because you're trying.
Yes, you're trying
and you want
to force
it to be
something.
A thing so bad.
Yes, it's this concept that I gotta say.
Come on, it's gonna work. You're trying to fit your square peg in the round hole.
Totally.
And then you just have to admit defeat in the end.
Yep. I've heard, that it's a numbers game. It's like you write 1,000 songs to get like 10 good ones or whatever.
Yeah, and you always go through the I'm not good enough journey.
Totally. And you just go through the journey of like becoming a better songwriter, but I think also just better at recognizing what is good songwriting. It's like there's a lot of music out there in the world. And, there's probably some people that they're just writing fantastic songs out the gate because they just have a gift and it's just coming through them and they're they don't know why, it just is.
Yes.
But I think to a certain degree, the whole 10,000 hours rule is a good thing just because there's a lot of music to listen to, and it just takes that amount of time to listen to it, engage with it, contemplate it, play with it, internalize it. I've always felt like the way that I make music is kind of like this funnel. I dump in anything that's great. Like, I'll give anything a chance, but I spend most of my time listening to albums and songs that have lasted the test of time. Mm-hmm. And I just pour that in. I just am like a sponge. And then as I create, I just trust my gut and whatever melodies come. I can definitely move things around as needed as I get better at knowing musical movement or intuitively having sung different melodies or different styles of singing, or you're able to do things maybe that you hear in your head already but you're not sure how to get out. But I'm not necessarily sure where I was going with that, other than I think there's just a certain amount of time that has to be put in to kind of work out the kinks and get familiar with just the large amount of music that's out there.
You and I came into the world with a certain amount of musical ability, and that alone has a certain level of weight, wherein, after a short amount of time, you might have a certain level of proficiency. So you think you're a higher caliber of artist than you are. Mm. And it's amazing to look back at my previous work and remember how I felt about it at the time and know now how short of the market fell. Mm. And how I wasn't nearly the artist I thought I was. But it's only with that 10,000 hours and the amount of time you put into just appreciating other people's music and learning new things, that's what gives you the hindsight then to look back and go, wow.
Yeah.
The level of delusion I was under is so evident now, but was so lost on me at the time.
Yeah. It's kind of ignorance is bliss kind of thing.
It's comical.
Yeah. And I know for me, it's tough to listen back to old stuff that I've done.
It's cringy.
It's cringy, painful.
And
my mom loves it still.
Well, yeah. My mom's always like, she'll bring stuff up about some performance.
Why don't you play this song anymore?
Yeah. And I'm just like, well, it's just
because that's 18-year-old me.
Yeah, I can't. It's not applicable. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
I've thought very seriously about just taking down a lot of my old stuff on Spotify because it just doesn't stack up to me.
I don't, simply because I like the idea of somebody being interested enough to knowing the journey. Like I like an artist that I really love. I'm a big John Mayer fan. There's a few artists that you find that's like something about them resonates with you so much that like pretty much anything they do, you like, you know.
Right.
And I like going back and hearing. I liked being able to hear the process of their development, you know, of like, this is the type of music he was making then.
Yeah.
Because you can hear through it. It's like even if you know, it's almost like you can hear what they were trying to do. Like even if you realize they didn't quite get there, I hear what they were trying to do.
Yeah, well, John Mayer, using him as an example, you go back to Room for Squares.
Yeah.
It's still very well recorded. The fidelity's great.
Oh, absolutely.
Beautifully mixed.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of my older stuff is just stuff I did in a basement.
Yeah. But one thing that's a huge.
It's just like
being able the delivery method and a producer there to like write potentially your vocal flaws and put it into a space that's actually palatable.
Yeah, like Clarence J produced my only American release so far. Eyes My Daddy Gave Me.
Yeah.
And sonically it's beautiful. He worked with the best guys. We had the best players on it.
It's got
state
of the art equipment.
Right.
Yeah.
So people go to my Spotify and they listen to it. And then after that, if it's on some automated play thing, now they're listening to a really crappy sounding demo I did in a basement. So it's just not congruous. So that's my concern, is that
what would be
the listening experience is kind of jarring.
And what would be the concern? What would be the result? That you would lose somebody potentially? Or lose a potential fan, or
well, I would lose the opportunity to
show them put your best foot forward.
Show them what I really can do.
Yeah,
it's just falling short of the ideal for me.
I see. Yeah, you want to present yourself in an excellent manner.
But then I also think, like you were saying, well, this is a snapshot of a time.
Yeah.
But how many people are really interested in that? They want to hear things that sound good. And
I don't know. Who knows? I kind of like the idea that there may be folks that out there that want to go back and see the journey. One thing, we talked about Room for Squares. One thing you'll notice, and I've heard John Mayer talk about this, is as a young person, you have so much to say, and it's like on Room for Squares, he was saying everything all at once, kind of thing.
Yeah, he was.
Musically, lyrically, it's like a lot going on.
Yeah.
And then you kind of watch as he gets older and more mature, is much more space and saying a lot more with a lot less. To me, that is a great definition of a master artist, is not how much you can say, is how much you can say with a little. And even how you use space. I think Miles Davis said, it's not what you play, it's what you don't play. It's is the space between what you're playing, even can be a thing.
Yeah.
And that takes, I think that's a maturity thing of going like, I can say, like B.B. King, one note, like.
Didn't play any chords.
Dude, one note tells you all kinds of stuff, you know what I mean? He doesn't have to shred. He plays one note, and it's just the way he can play it over and over. It's the way he plays it. It's how he articulates it that is masterful and meaningful and emotional. And
right.
Same goes with songwriting. You don't have to say all the things. You can say a couple things and it be as profound. Which that could lead to like what I've heard you talk about, of like not wanting to preface what songs are about and leaving that to the audience, of like talk about that, like the aspect of like the idea that like when you write a song, somebody could experience it any number of ways despite how you wrote it. Go talk about that.
Well, I do worry about that as an artist, because Nashville's a very storytelling oriented town.
Definitely.
And there's an expectation that you tell the audience a little bit about the song you're about to play before you play it. And I've reconciled myself to that, and I do it. But my prime concern is that as an artist, I've written this song. Perhaps the song has a certain level of ambiguity where I'm expecting the listener to interpret it as they might, and maybe those interpretations would be completely different. There'd be myriad differences in those interpretations.
You've chosen to write in such a way to leave it open to interpretation.
Yeah, maybe so. And so when I'm giving some kind of preamble to the audience, I keep that in mind, and I try and talk about it in a way that still leaves that door open,
right,
and allows for that interpretation. And I've found a certain amount of joy in it. I like talking about the process. I'll maybe describe where it was recorded or how it came about. There's one song I wrote that I kind of threw away, and my wife convinced me to resurrect, and it's a song people like. So
which one's that?
I'll talk about Rosalie.
Oh, that's a great one.
Thanks, dude. So I'll do that, but
that's mind-boggling to me that would be a throwaway song.
Yeah, I just didn't know what kind of place it had. But
yep.
The idea when I write a song is that everything that I have to say is encapsulated in the song, so it's therefore really difficult for me to now come up with more things to say about it when I feel like I've already said whatever needed to be said. Yeah. So, and I'm not outside of songwriting, I'm not a natural storyteller. I've had a very colorful, eclectic life, but, and I could tell a lot of great stories, but I just don't. It's just not my nature. So it's
not necessarily somebody who likes to hear themselves talk, kind of thing.
Sort of bringing me out of my comfort zone a little bit to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Taking up space in a environment.
Yeah.
When do you know that a song is finished?
When it's no longer nagging at me, I feel like a song is complete. There's a song I've been working on recently. Is for a sort of a solo rock project, and I keep thinking it's done, and then something will come into my head, and I'll have to go in and change it again. But I feel like it is now because those voices are dissipating. But when something's just niggling at me to the point where I have to revisit it, then I know it's not finished yet, and it's impossible to ignore. And I guess that's your muse, right? That's how your muse operates. It's like, hey, pay more attention, You got to make some adjustments here. I'm very particular about my lyrics, and everything has to be very intentional and personal. I don't like to repeat myself in a song. If I see a word that I'm using more than once,
I can't stand that.
There better be a good reason for it.
There better be good. That's one thing. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine, is especially when that word is rhymed with itself.
Oh,
I can't stand it.
I know.
I work really hard not to do that. And sometimes I hear people do it, and it's like, oh, I don't like it.
No, I always thought that about the Toby Keith song, As Good As I Once Was, because I love that tune. But the hook line is, I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. And I always wanted him to say, I ain't as good as I was once, but I'm as good once as I ever was. Because
there you go.
Then you don't have the same word twice.
Yes, to me that's a superior wordplay.
I think so.
Yes.
It's more appealing to the ear.
Yes, that's one thing of my favorite parts about songwriting is wordplay and how you twist and use words that we're familiar with and twist them in new ways, or use metaphor in ways that create pictures. And one great, I guess, premise for writing songs or technique is to write songs that allow all five senses to engage. Like great songs allow you to engage with your senses, the listener, to where it puts them in a place and time and a space, and as much as you can use metaphor and visual language to let them engage.
Saturday in the park.
I think it was the 4th of July. Yeah.
Painting a
totally
three-dimensional picture.
Yeah, and I think too, like the more kind of the last thing you want to be in songwriting, it's very hard to do, but especially with as many songs as has been written, is be cliche. And to me, the best way to not be cliche is literally look like around the room and write things that are just in your, like every country song in the world is about a dirt road and a truck and a whatever. But if you were to say something about that dirt road that differentiate it from every other dirt road, or I'm looking at this trunk here, the gold and green on the treasure trunk in front of me shine through the, it's just like, oh, what the heck is that? That's it. Interesting. That's an object in a space that I've never been before, as opposed to like, I've been there 1,000 times. We've all been there 1,000, and which that's fine. It's not so much because there's this juxtaposition of like, there's nothing new under the sun as a premise. We're all writing about the same things that are continually happening all the time. We're all stealing from each other, copying, recycling. But the one thing that hasn't been done is seeing all that through your eyes. To me, that's the way that you are original. The originality thing is not trying to say something that's never been said. It's just never been said by you. And how would you say that?
Yeah, in that particular way.
Yeah. I think we're kind of coming down to the finish line, but let's talk about some of the aspects of songwriting, like melody. What are your thoughts on melody? Not my daughter.
Melody is something that comes very easily to me once you give me any given progression.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy it for that reason. It's delightful to come up with melodies because they just happen, and they happen in a surprising way that makes me just as much a listener as anybody who might be there. I'm along for the ride like anybody else. I don't know where it's going, but I surprise myself at times, and then hopefully it's recorded, and then the painful process of writing the lyrics begins at that point. But melodies, an easy aspect of songwriting.
That one just comes through you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always been of the philosophy that melody is king. To me, it's the driving force of the song. It's the thing that is going to stick with you. It's the thing that makes a great song from a good song. And I feel the same. Like, give me a chord progression, I can melody for days.
Right.
Would you say that you've always been that good with melody? And or has your melody writing improved as you've studied and ingested other melodies?
Yeah, it's improved.
Yeah.
It's improved a lot.
Because like you almost like wouldn't know. I wonder, it's really almost like you wouldn't know what a melody could do unless you heard somebody do it a particular way. This delivery, Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's interesting, whereas you might do la la la.
Yeah, it might be more legato,
whatever, early on, but then all of a sudden you hear this kind of whatever. It's like, oh, well, what is that? What makes that cool?
Yeah.
And then you might try this staccato thing with your own melodies, and then you have kind of like another tool in your belt.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't think it can really help but get better with time, because you're constantly exposed to new music, new information. You're hearing how other people deliver it, and so now you're adding that, and you're constantly widening your horizon. So, chord structure and chord nuance brought me to a new realm with melody, where when I was less knowledgeable about chords, I might just play some major and minors. Now I know about a major 7 or a 7 or a 9, and how I can do that instead, and I can just hang out on one chord, move from the major to a natural to a or whatever it might be, without shifting to another chord, and that can inform my melody now. And now I know what it is about those chords that sets them apart from ordinary major and minor chords. Now I can add those notes to my vocal melody. Knowing that, and so,
I mean, I'm like you in that, melodies always come easy, but it doesn't come easy for everybody. And what would you say, like, if you were going to tell somebody that's like, I have a hard time coming up with melodies, how would you tell them to, besides just trust your gut kind of thing, how would you tell them to potentially some tools or tricks to help them come up with melodies?
Well, knowing what the chords are you're singing to is a great start. And then from there, learn what the arpeggio notes are in each of those chords. Then learn to sing those arpeggios over the chords. And then from there, you can start to develop melody, because now you've made yourself aware of the notes inherent in each chord.
Because more than likely when you and I are singing natural melodies that are coming, they come from notes that are in the chords that are happening.
Yeah.
Yes. We wouldn't know
Sometimes
that.
not.
Maybe not. But there's a lot of notes that are shared between chords.
But it's usually within the scale in some way.
Yeah, more than likely, yeah.
But again, we're drawing on things that we've added to our toolbox
Right.
and so on and so forth. But if you're just starting out, you have trouble with melody, I think starting with arpeggios, which is, just singing the notes in a mathematical way, really.
Ba, 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 ba.
Yeah. That's a great place to start. Now you can start subtracting notes and adding them as necessary, and that's where the artistic sensibility comes in.
Yeah. I think one way I used to try different things is like, let me start my melody out here, and what do I come up with that way? And then let me start my melody out here, and what does that make me want to do? And then maybe let me try another note, and let's see where, like, in a kind of basic chord progression, you probably have a 3-note chord, right? If you're playing like a 1-4-5, you got 3 notes in the chord. That's 3 notes that you could start on,
Yeah.
And then that also gives you like places to, especially if you're trying to lift your chorus. Well, you don't want to start your verse melody too high because then you can't lift. So you might want to take your verse melody down a little bit, maybe even an octave or somewhere in between where you started, so you can do this and get there.
You could also just start with rhythm and use one note and play right, almost like a Morse code thing. And there are lots of songs, popular songs, that really have no melody at all and rely almost entirely on the rhythm. Come Together is a good example of that. Really, there's just really no melody. It's all rhythm.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe, if melody isn't coming as easily, it might be better to start with the rhythm aspect of it and work from there.
Yeah. What about chord progression? How do you go about coming up with chord progressions? Trying stuff out, working it for a while. Do you usually you come up with the chord progression and then you sing the melody over the chord progression? You ever do it the other way? Where it's like you got a melody.
It usually starts with the chord progression.
And then you're humming gibberish over the chord progression.
Yeah.
You kind of know, this is my verse section, this is my chorus section.
Well, it'll start with the chords, and I usually have an idea as to what vibe I'm working towards. If it's a groovy song, maybe the chords are going to be bluesier. So now that's my starting point. So knowing that, now I figure out the chord progression. Or maybe it's more of a ballad. Yeah. Okay, there's typical chords you use in those things.
Definitely.
So starting position as to what the vibe is always important, and then it tends to work itself out from there.
Yeah. One thing probably worth mentioning is one great thing that I learned, and probably a big Nashville thing, is like having a strong concept, having a strong starting point for a hook, or even knowing what your hook is like really helpful, I find. Before, sometimes I'll write songs and I'm not sure where I'm going until I get there, but I do know one thing. At least I know this. If I start that way, I have to arrive somewhere that's strong, or else I just throw the whole thing away. But otherwise, starting with the concept, this is where I'm landing, this is my hook line.
Yeah.
Then is a much easier place to write from, because I know where I'm going. I know where I need to get to. That informs all of my verbiage on the verses. Everything around it has to point to that, because that's where I'm going. To me, that's a pretty strong recommendation as far as writing great songs. It's like where it lands and the delivery of the hook is, besides melody, the second thing is the hook. Maybe they're as equal. Maybe they're equal in value, but having a strong hook is. It'd be hard to have a song that didn't have a strong hook. Although I'm sure there's plenty of examples of maybe there's no hook, or maybe there. It
probably wouldn't be very popular.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe not. The Dylan song may not have a hook section, chorus section, but like the end of the line.
Yeah, I don't think a good hook requires a chorus necessarily.
No, hook is just the resounding theme of the song. You know, it might be on a Dylan song, it might have a verse, and then it lands on that hook after every verse.
A lot of his songs didn't have a chorus. He obviously, Like a Rolling Stone is the most chorusy song ever written, but Tambourine Man, The Times Are Changing, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. These are all songs that really consisted
it's like more of a folk style.
Yeah, it's verse after verse, concluding with the hook line.
Yeah. I keep thinking of With God on Our Side.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great one.
Yeah.
Every verse ends with some sort of new way of thinking about the idea of having God on your side.
That's right? Is that it?
The melody is...
On Top of Old Smoky, I believe, was the original song.
Oh, really?
And then he changed the lyrics, I think.
I don't know.
I might be mistaken.
I'm not sure. It's not coming to me at the moment, but I have a song called War, where the hook line is really at the beginning of each verse.
Cool.
It's not really a chorus. There's a war, da da dee da da dee 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 dee. But and then it's like each verse here's aspects of the war. But each verse starts with there's a war, and then
I like that.
Yeah. And that's one that just came to me. Where it's like a song called War. You know, it's just a strong, off the bat, strong word, strong visual. That's always a big indicator to me. It is like, is that a strong word? You know?
Yeah.
And then from there, it's like, sometimes we just, I'm pretty sure it just started with, there's a war, which to me, that reminded me of, Dylan has a song, Come Ye Masters of War, build the big bombs,
Yeah. That was later Dylan, maybe, a little bit?
I think that was on, like, one of those earlier three acoustic records, I think.
Very interesting artist.
Absolutely. And one like morphing artist. Like you could take it just, like spin the globe and put your finger down. At any point in Dylan's career, you hear a completely different dude.
You do. His voice changed too.
Yeah. You listen to Nashville Skyline. Lay, lady, lay. It's like, who the heck is that? Like
Jordan Peterson?
Yeah. Jordan Peterson. That's great.
Clean your room, Bucko.
Anything else you can think of?
No. I love you.
Oh, love you too, bro. Let's give a high five. Thanks for tuning in to whatever the heck this is or will become.
This was my first time doing a video cast, I believe.
It's actually the second. The other one hasn't.
I know, but nobody's
going
to see that one.
Who knows what order these will.
Oh, I suppose you're right. Anyway, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. We're going to go.
Thanks for having me, whoever you are.
All right.